My grandfather whispered, "I'll see you soon," and died. My son just said the same to me. My 4-year-old son just looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'll see you soon, kiddo," in a voice that wasn't his. Same raspy tone my grandfather used. Same nickname nobody else knew. Ethan's been speaking normally his whole life until 3 days ago, when he woke up different. Now he talks like an old man, walks with a limp my grandfather had from Korea, and yesterday I caught him trying to light a pipe he found in my garage. My grandfather died 6 months ago, whispering those exact words to me in his hospital room. I'm sitting in Ethan's bedroom right now, watching him sleep, while my wife Rachel thinks I'm losing my mind downstairs. She heard what he said to me an hour ago and called her mother asking if there's a history of mental illness in my family. But here's what she doesn't know. This morning I found Ethan standing in our closet, holding my grandfather's Purple Heart. We'd packed that medal away in a box on the top shelf after the funeral. There's no way a 4-year-old could have reached it. When I asked what he was doing, he looked at me with these tired old eyes and said he needed to make sure it was still safe. Said the Nazis might come looking for it. My grandfather fought in Korea, not World War II. Ethan shouldn't know anything about Nazis. The weird stuff started exactly 1 week after my grandfather's funeral. Ethan woke up screaming about someone named Jimmy Castellano. Not a nightmare scream, but angry yelling like he was in the middle of an argument. Rachel ran into his room and found him standing on his bed pointing at nothing, shouting that Jimmy still owed him $50 from 1952. I'd never mentioned Jimmy to Ethan. Hell, I barely remembered Jimmy myself until that moment. He'd been my grandfather's best friend who died in a car accident 70 years ago. My grandfather used to joke about that $50 debt at family dinners, said Jimmy better have the money waiting in heaven. How did Ethan know that name? How did he know about the money? Rachel said he must have overheard adults talking at the funeral, but Ethan wasn't at the funeral. We'd left him with Rachel's parents because we thought 4 was too young to understand death. The next morning, Ethan asked for black coffee, not chocolate milk, not juice, coffee. He said it with this annoyed tone like we should have known already. Rachel laughed and poured him apple juice instead. Ethan took one sip, made a face, and said, "This isn't coffee, this is kid garbage." Those exact words. Kid garbage. That's what my grandfather always called anything sweet. I started keeping notes on my phone. Every strange thing Ethan said or did. Wednesday he complained that his knee hurt, pointing to the exact spot where my grandfather had shrapnel embedded from the war. Thursday he asked where his workshop was, getting frustrated when I didn't understand. My grandfather had a workshop in his basement for 50 years. Friday, Ethan drew a picture in preschool that made his teacher call us in for a meeting. She showed us the drawing with this concerned look on her face. It was a house, meticulously detailed, with a red door and a specific window configuration. She said Ethan had spent an hour on it, getting upset when other kids tried to play with him. He kept saying he needed to get it exactly right, because this was his house and he missed it. The address he'd written at the top in shaky numbers, 247 Oakwood Drive, my grandfather's house, the house we'd just sold after he died. Ethan had been inside it maybe 3 times in his life, always briefly for holiday visits. He'd never been upstairs, never seen the layout, yet his drawing showed details only someone who'd lived there would know. The location of the back porch, the separate entrance to the basement, even the old dogwood tree in the front yard that we'd cut down 5 years ago. Rachel scheduled an appointment with a child psychologist. Dr. Miriam Ashworth listened to everything, took notes, and suggested that Ethan was processing the concept of death through play and imagination. Kids his age don't understand death as permanent, she explained. He might be creating elaborate stories to make sense of his grandfather being gone. But Ethan had never met my grandfather. My grandfather had been in a nursing home for 2 years before he died, deteriorating from Alzheimer's. We'd kept Ethan away, thinking the visits would be traumatic. So Ethan had no memories of him, no relationship to process. Dr. Ashworth paused when I told her this, asked me to bring Ethan in for evaluation. The appointment was scheduled for next week. That night, I found Ethan in the kitchen at 2 a.m., not getting water or looking for snacks. He was sitting at the table in the dark, completely still, staring at nothing. When I turned on the light, he didn't react, just kept staring straight ahead with this blank expression that made my skin crawl. I said his name 3 times before he finally blinked and looked at me. "Why are you up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Thinking about the war," he said. "Had to leave so many behind." The way he said it, with this heavy sadness that didn't belong to a 4-year-old, made me want to grab him and shake him until my real son came back. Instead, I picked him up and carried him to bed. He was dead weight in my arms, not fighting or helping, just letting me move him like he was too tired to care. I tucked him in, and he grabbed my hand. His little fingers felt cold. "I missed you, kiddo," he said. "Missed you so much." That was my grandfather's voice. Not similar, not close, exact. Same gravelly tone, same speech pattern, coming from my son's 4-year-old mouth. I pulled my hand away like I'd been burned and left the room. Rachel found me sitting on the couch at 3 a.m. staring at the wall. She asked what was wrong and I couldn't tell her. "How do you explain to your wife that your son is haunted, possessed, replaced?" I didn't have words for what was happening. The next morning, Ethan acted completely normal. Watched cartoons, ate cereal, laughed at stupid kid jokes, like the night before hadn't happened. I watched him carefully, looking for signs of whatever had taken him over. But he was just Ethan, my son, until he wasn't. Rachel's mother came over that afternoon to watch Ethan while we ran errands. When we got back 2 hours later, she was sitting on the couch looking pale and shaken. Ethan was upstairs in his room. He told me about my miscarriage, she said quietly. Rachel froze. What miscarriage? Her mother looked at me, then back at Rachel. The one I had before you were born. The baby boy I lost. I never told anyone except your father and my mother. Both dead now. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and headed for the door. There's something wrong with that child. She left before we could stop her. Rachel went upstairs to Ethan's room. I followed. We found him playing with blocks, building something. Rachel knelt next to him and asked what he'd said to Grandma. Told her I met baby Thomas, Ethan said, not looking up from his blocks. He's with me now. Says she shouldn't feel bad anymore. Baby Thomas. That had been the name Rachel's mother had planned to use. Rachel started crying. Not sad crying. Scared crying. The kind that makes your whole body shake. I got Ethan out of the room and called Dr. Ashworth, explained everything. The personality changes. The impossible knowledge. The voice. She said to bring him in immediately, not to wait for next week's appointment. We drove to her office in silence. Ethan sat in his car seat humming a song I didn't recognize. Old song. Big band era sound. When I asked what he was singing, he said it was the song that played at his wedding. Your wedding? I tried to keep my voice steady. Yep. Married Louise at St. Catherine's in 1954. Best day of my life. Louise was my grandmother's name. St. Catherine's was where they'd gotten married. Ethan had never heard these stories. I'd never talked about my grandparents' wedding. Dr. Ashworth met us in her office, a small room with toys and comfortable chairs designed to put kids at ease. She asked Ethan to play while she talked to us. He ignored the toys and sat in the chair like an adult, hands folded in his lap, waiting. She started with simple questions. His name, his age, his favorite color. Ethan answered everything correctly, but his voice kept shifting. Sometimes it was his normal kid voice. Sometimes it was that old man rasp. She asked him to draw a picture of his family. He drew 4 people, 2 adults, a child, and an old man, standing separate from the others. That's Daddy, Mama, me, and me, he said, pointing to each figure. Dr. Ashworth looked at the drawing for a long time, asked Ethan if he knew what death meant. Sure, he said. It's when your body stops, but you don't. You go somewhere else and wait. Wait for what? To come back. She asked him if he remembered being someone else. He nodded, said he was William Crawford, my grandfather's name, and he'd died 6 months ago but couldn't leave yet. Still had things to do. Still needed to see his grandson grow up. Dr. Ashworth looked at me. Her expression said this was beyond anything she'd encountered. She asked to speak with me and Rachel privately. We left Ethan in the play area with an assistant and followed her to another room. I need to be honest, she said. This doesn't fit any psychological pattern I know. Dissociative identity disorder doesn't present this way in children. Imagination doesn't produce verifiable information about dead people. What you're describing sounds like... She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Like what? Rachel's voice was sharp with fear. Like possession or reincarnation. Things outside my professional scope. She gave us referrals. A neurologist to rule out medical causes. A psychiatrist who specialized in unusual cases. And quietly, the number of a paranormal researcher at the university. We took Ethan to the neurologist first. Dr. Patel ran every test. MRI, EEG, blood work, checking for tumors, seizures, anything that could explain personality changes and false memories. Everything came back normal. Ethan's brain was perfectly healthy. No physical cause for what was happening. The psychiatrist, Dr. Vernon Liu, was next. He spent 3 hours with Ethan over 2 sessions, administering tests, asking questions, observing behavior. His conclusion was the same as Dr. Ashworth's. No psychological disorder explained this. Ethan wasn't delusional, wasn't dissociating. He was coherent, grounded, and genuinely seemed to have 2 distinct consciousness coexisting. Dr. Liu had never seen anything like it. He suggested we document everything and stay in close contact. If Ethan's condition deteriorated, we'd need to consider psychiatric admission for his safety. Rachel cried the whole drive home. I held it together until we pulled into the garage. Then I sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying not to scream. That night, I called the paranormal researcher, Professor Diana Reeves at the State University. She specialized in consciousness studies and anomalous experiences. She agreed to meet with us off the record, said she couldn't officially be involved but was too intrigued to say no. Professor Reeves came to our house the next evening. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the careful professional demeanor of someone used to being dismissed as crazy. She asked to speak with Ethan alone first. We waited downstairs, listening to the murmur of their voices through the ceiling. After an hour, she came down, looking troubled. I've been researching cases like this for 15 years, she said. What your son is exhibiting matches documented cases of past life memories. Usually these emerge naturally in children between ages 2 and 5, then fade by age 7. But this is different. The transition was sudden. The memories are recent, and the previous personality is someone the child knew. She explained that most reincarnation cases involve strangers from different times and places, children remembering lives as people who died before they were born. This was something else, something more like a walk-in. A what? Rachel asked. A walk-in, the concept that a soul can enter a body that's already occupied, usually with permission. In shamanic traditions, it's seen as a spiritual intervention. The new soul has unfinished business and needs a body to complete it. She looked at me carefully. Did your grandfather have unfinished business? I thought about those last days in the hospital. My grandfather had been mostly gone, lost to Alzheimer's, barely recognizing anyone. But on his last day, he'd had a moment of clarity, grabbed my hand with surprising strength and said he wasn't done yet. Still had things to teach me. Still needed to see me become the man I was supposed to be. I'd thought it was dying confusion, last sparks of a fading mind. But what if it wasn't? What if he'd meant it literally? Professor Reeves asked if we'd consent to her documenting Ethan's case, said she'd keep our identities anonymous but wanted to record his statements, verify his knowledge, build a proper case study. Rachel said absolutely not. Wasn't going to turn our son into a research project. I agreed to think about it. That night, Ethan had another episode. Woke up screaming about the camp, about the cold, about watching friends die, the Korean War, my grandfather's war. Rachel held him while he cried, but the sobs sounded wrong. Too deep, too anguished. The grief of someone who'd lived through hell, not a child having a nightmare. When he finally calmed down, he looked at me with those old eyes again. I'm sorry, kiddo. Didn't mean to scare you all. Just gets hard sometimes remembering. The next morning, I found letters in the garage. Old letters my grandfather had written during the war, stored in a box with his other military stuff. I'd never read them before. They were addressed to my grandmother, describing the camps, the cold, the friends he'd lost, the exact details Ethan had screamed about. I brought one letter inside and asked Ethan about it. Showed him a passage about a soldier named Ricky Morrison who died saving my grandfather's life. Ricky was the best of us, Ethan said immediately, not needing to read the letter. Took a bullet meant for me, told me to tell his ma he loved her, never got the chance. He looked up at me. That's why I came back. Too many things I never said. Too many people I never thanked. My hands were shaking holding that letter. Rachel was standing in the doorway, watching. She'd heard everything. This isn't possible, she whispered. But it was happening, right in front of us. Our son was being shared with my dead grandfather's consciousness. Professor Reeves returned with equipment, audio recorders, cameras, forms for us to sign. Rachel refused to sign anything but agreed to let her ask questions. We needed answers more than we needed privacy. The interview lasted 4 hours. Professor Reeves asked Ethan hundreds of questions about my grandfather's life. Names of childhood friends, addresses of houses he'd lived in, details about his time in the war. Ethan answered everything. Things I didn't know. Things I had to verify later through old documents and photographs. His accuracy was impossible. No 4-year-old could know this information. Nobody could know this information without having lived it. She asked him why he'd come back, why he was in Ethan's body. Because I wasn't ready, he said in that old man voice. Wasn't ready to leave him. Still had to teach him things, show him how to be a good man. Professor Reeves asked if he planned to stay. Long as I can, he said. Long as he'll let me. She looked at Ethan carefully. Is Ethan still in there? Can we talk to him? Ethan's expression changed, softened. The old man disappeared, and my son came back. Grandpa's here, he said in his normal voice. He's nice, tells me stories, says he loves Daddy very much. Rachel started crying again. I couldn't move, couldn't process what I was hearing. My son and my grandfather sharing the same body, both conscious, both present. Professor Reeves explained that in documented cases of possession or soul sharing, the original personality usually remained dominant. The intruding consciousness was more like a passenger, influencing but not controlling. But this seemed different. This seemed like an equal partnership. Both souls present, both aware, trading control. She'd never seen anything documented like it. Over the next few weeks, we learned to live with this new reality. Some days, Ethan was just Ethan, playing, laughing, being 4 years old. Other days, my grandfather was more present, teaching Ethan things, showing him how to tie different knots, explaining how to fix things, sharing stories about the family. Rachel struggled more than I did. She wanted her son back, not this hybrid of child and old man. She couldn't hold him without wondering who she was really holding. Couldn't read him bedtime stories without watching for that shift in his eyes that meant someone else was listening. Our marriage started cracking under the strain. We stopped sleeping in the same bed, stopped talking about anything except logistics. She blamed me somehow, like my grandfather's love for me had caused this, like I'd unconsciously invited him into our son's body. My mother came to visit. I'd been avoiding telling her what was happening, but she noticed immediately that something was wrong with Ethan. He called her by her childhood nickname that only my grandfather used, asked about her sister's surgery, something she'd only told my grandfather about before he died. She sat down hard on the couch and stared at him. "Dad?" she whispered. Ethan nodded, walked over to her and took her hand. "I'm here, sweetheart." "Still here." She broke down completely. I held her while she cried and asked questions. How was this possible? Why had he come back? Was he okay? Ethan answered everything in my grandfather's voice, comforting her, telling her he was fine. That death wasn't the end. That love was stronger than anything. My mother left hours later, shaken but strangely comforted. She called me that night and said she'd been so scared of death since my grandfather died, terrified of losing more people. But seeing him and Ethan, knowing consciousness continued somehow, gave her peace. Maybe this was a gift, she said. Maybe we should be grateful, instead of scared. But Rachel wasn't grateful. Rachel was terrified. She started researching exorcisms, found priests who performed them, made calls asking about procedures, risks, success rates. I found her planning notes one night, detailed steps for removing an unwanted spirit from a possessed person. She'd highlighted passages about children being particularly vulnerable to demonic possession. He's not a demon, I said, holding her notes. He's my grandfather. He's something using our son's body, she shot back. And you're too blind to see how wrong this is. We fought, really fought, said things we couldn't take back. She accused me of choosing my dead grandfather over our living son. I accused her of wanting to hurt something she didn't understand. We went to bed angry, in separate rooms, with Ethan sleeping between us, literally and figuratively. The next morning, Ethan was sick. Really sick. Fever of 104. Couldn't keep anything down. We rushed him to the emergency room. The doctors ran tests, blood work, cultures, CT scan. They couldn't find anything wrong. No infection, no virus, nothing to explain the fever. But Ethan was getting worse, slipping in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, he wasn't either Ethan or my grandfather. He was confused, frightened, not recognizing us. The doctors admitted him to the pediatric ICU, started IV fluids and antibiotics just in case. Rachel and I sat by his bed, not talking, just watching him breathe. Professor Reeves came. She'd been staying in contact, checking on Ethan's condition. She sat with us for hours, monitoring him, taking notes. Around midnight, Ethan opened his eyes, looked at me with perfect clarity. "It's time," he said in my grandfather's voice. "Can't hold on anymore. Body's rejecting me." I grabbed his hand. "What do you mean? What's happening?" "I came back because I wasn't ready to leave you. Wanted to see you raise your boy. But I'm making him sick. 2 souls in 1 body isn't natural. Can't last forever." Tears were running down my face. "So what happens now?" "I go back. Let him be himself again. But I need you to know something first." He squeezed my hand with surprising strength for such a small, sick body. "You're going to be a good man. Better than me. You already are. I'm proud of you, kiddo. Always have been." Those were the same words he'd whispered in the hospital 6 months ago. His actual last words. "I'll see you soon, kiddo." I realized now he'd meant it. Meant he'd find a way back. And he had. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Scared of losing you again. You never lost me. I'm always with you. Just not like this anymore." He looked at Rachel, who was crying silently. "Take care of them. Love them better than I could. Learn from my mistakes." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was Ethan. Just Ethan. Looking confused and sick, but himself. The fever broke within an hour. By morning, he was asking for breakfast. The doctors were baffled. They'd never seen such a rapid recovery with no medical intervention. They kept him another day for observation, then sent us home with instructions to follow up with his pediatrician. We didn't tell them what we knew, that Ethan's illness had been caused by something they couldn't treat, that the healing came from a soul finally letting go. At home, I watched Ethan carefully for signs of my grandfather, but there was nothing. Just my son being 4, playing with his toys, watching cartoons, no old man voice, no impossible knowledge. He'd forgotten everything about being William Crawford. When I asked him if he remembered Grandpa being with him, he looked confused. "Grandpa's in heaven, Daddy, with Jesus and the angels." Professor Reeves came by one last time, asked Ethan questions, testing his memory. He remembered nothing. Whatever had been there was gone. She said this was consistent with other cases she'd studied. When the intrusive consciousness left, the host body usually had no memory of the experience, like waking from a dream. She packed up her equipment and thanked us for allowing her to document what she'd seen. Said our case would go in her files, anonymized, as one of the most compelling examples of soul transference she'd encountered. But there was a look in her eyes that said she didn't expect anyone to believe it. Rachel started sleeping in our bed again, started holding Ethan without looking afraid. We didn't talk about what happened, just moved forward, trying to rebuild normal. My mother called weekly, asking if there had been any more signs, any indication my grandfather was still around. I told her no, but I kept finding small things that made me wonder. Ethan's drawing suddenly included details from my grandfather's life. Houses he'd lived in, cars he'd owned. He'd incorporate them naturally, like background scenery, not knowing where the images came from. When I taught him to ride a bike, he picked it up impossibly fast. Said his body remembered how, even though he'd never been on a bike before. Then something happened that made me realize my grandfather hadn't left completely. We were cleaning out the attic 3 months after everything ended, sorting through boxes of old family photos. Ethan found a picture I'd never seen before. My grandfather as a young man, maybe 20, standing next to a car. Ethan stared at that photo for a full minute before saying, "That's a 1949 Chevy Fleetline. Bought it with my discharge pay. Drove it until the engine seized in '56. I checked the back of the photo. Sure enough, there was handwriting. Me and my Fleetline, 1949. Rachel saw my face and asked what was wrong. I showed her the photo and told her what Ethan had said. She went pale. "It's starting again," she whispered. But it wasn't starting again. Not the way it had been before. This was different. Ethan didn't have full memories, just fragments, flashes of knowledge that surfaced randomly. Like my grandfather had left pieces of himself behind when he left. Breadcrumbs scattered through Ethan's consciousness. Professor Reeves called that night. Said she'd been analyzing the recordings from those final days in the hospital. Found something that changed her understanding of what happened. The fever that had nearly killed Ethan wasn't rejection, it was integration. She explained that when two souls occupy one body, they remain separate entities. But sometimes, under extreme circumstances, they can merge, become one consciousness with memories from both sources. She thought that's what had happened to Ethan during those critical hours. My grandfather hadn't left completely. He'd dissolved into Ethan, became part of him. "So he's still there?" I asked. "In a way," she said carefully, "but not as a separate entity. More like memories transferred during the merge. Ethan now has access to experiences he never lived, knowledge he never learned. Your grandfather's consciousness isn't in him anymore. It's become part of him." I didn't know if that made things better or worse. My son carrying my grandfather's memories, walking around with 70 years of experiences that weren't his own, living a life informed by someone else's past. I started noticing more signs. Ethan would react to things he shouldn't recognize. Old songs would make him smile without knowing why. Certain smells would trigger responses he couldn't explain. One day we drove past my grandfather's old house, and Ethan got upset, said he wanted to go home. Rachel looked at me in the rearview mirror. We both knew what he meant. That house was home to the part of him that used to be William Crawford. My mother's sister came to visit, Aunt Dorothy, who I hadn't seen in years. She'd been close to my grandfather, closer than anyone knew. When Ethan saw her, something shifted in his expression. Not the full takeover like before, just recognition. He walked up to her and said, "You still owe me for those poker games, Dot." Aunt Dorothy dropped her purse, stared at Ethan with tears in her eyes. "Billy?" she whispered. Nobody called my grandfather Billy. It was William or Bill, but to her, apparently, he'd been Billy. Ethan smiled at her, not his 4-year-old smile, something older. "Told you I'd see you again," he said. Then he blinked, and was just Ethan again, confused why everyone was staring at him. Aunt Dorothy spent an hour telling me stories about my grandfather I'd never heard. Secret stories, private moments, things only the two of them had known. She said they'd been in love as teenagers before my grandfather met my grandmother. They'd made a pact. If anything happened to one of them, they'd find a way to say goodbye. 60 years later, through my son, he'd kept that promise. She left our house looking lighter, like a weight she'd carried for decades had finally lifted. I started researching genetic memory, the concept that memories could be passed down through DNA. Scientists had documented it in animals, mice inheriting fear responses from parents who'd been traumatized, birds knowing migration routes they'd never flown. But human genetic memory was controversial, unproven. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something like that was happening with Ethan. Not possession, not reincarnation, something cellular, biological. My grandfather's consciousness had somehow imprinted itself on Ethan during those months of sharing, left traces in his neurons, patterns in his brain that would influence him forever. Professor Reeves agreed to meet one more time. I showed her all my research, all my observations. She listened carefully, taking notes, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I think you're right," she finally said. "But it's more than genetic memory. It's conscious transference. Your grandfather didn't just share space with Ethan. He taught him, showed him things. And when he left, those teachings remained. Like a teacher leaving knowledge with a student." She pulled out a file. Inside were documents from other cases she'd studied, children who'd exhibited similar patterns, brief periods of possession or soul sharing, followed by years of carrying fragments of the other consciousness. "These children don't remember being possessed," she explained, "but they carry knowledge and skills from the other soul." One boy suddenly knew how to speak Portuguese, a language his deceased uncle had spoken. A girl developed an ability to paint in the style of her dead grandfather, a professional artist she'd never met. The soul doesn't stay, but the impact does. She looked at me seriously. "Ethan will spend his life influenced by experiences he never had. He'll make decisions based on wisdom he didn't earn. He'll carry your grandfather forward in ways neither of you understand yet." I asked if that was dangerous, if Ethan would be okay living with someone else's memories. "I don't know," she admitted. "These cases are so rare. We don't have long-term data, but based on what I've seen, these children tend to be unusually wise for their age. Old souls, people call them. They understand things other kids don't, feel things more deeply. It's a gift and a burden." That night I watched Ethan sleep, thinking about the life ahead of him, carrying my grandfather's war trauma, his regrets, his wisdom, his love, all of it woven into a 4-year-old's consciousness. How would that shape who he became? What kind of man would he grow into? Rachel and I started seeing a marriage counselor. Dr. Patricia Odom specialized in families dealing with trauma. We told her everything. She didn't judge or dismiss, just listened and helped us process. She said what we'd experienced was similar to families dealing with a child's severe illness, the fear, the helplessness, the strain on the relationship. She gave us tools to communicate better, ways to support each other through continued uncertainty. Because Ethan wasn't fixed, wasn't cured. He was just different now, changed by something we'd never fully understand. The counseling helped. Rachel and I started talking again, really talking, about our fears for Ethan, about our grief for the normal childhood he'd never have, about our anger at my grandfather for doing this to us, even as we understood he'd acted out of love. We started having date nights again, rebuilding intimacy that had been destroyed by months of crisis, learning to be partners again instead of just co-survivors. Ethan started kindergarten that fall. His teacher called us in after the first week, said Ethan was advanced beyond his years, could read at a 3rd grade level, did math problems that should have been impossible for a 5-year-old. But also, he didn't play like other kids, would sit during recess drawing detailed pictures or just watching clouds. She asked if he'd been tested for gifted programs. We had him tested. The results were shocking. Ethan scored in the 99th percentile for verbal reasoning. His spatial awareness was off the charts, but his emotional intelligence scored even higher. The psychologist administering the test said she'd never seen a 5-year-old with such sophisticated emotional understanding. He could read people's feelings with uncanny accuracy, knew when someone was lying or hiding something. She asked if there was anything unusual in his development we should share. Rachel and I looked at each other. How do you explain that your son carries the consciousness of his great-grandfather? That he has 70 years of human experience compressed into 5 years of life? We said he'd always been an old soul. Left it at that. The psychologist accepted this, but made a note in her file. Recommended continued monitoring. Said children with this level of advancement often struggled socially. Ethan needed support to connect with peers who couldn't match his cognitive or emotional depth. She was right. Ethan struggled to make friends. Other kids thought he was weird, too serious, too adult. He'd try to join their games but would get frustrated when they didn't follow rules he thought were obvious, would make comments about fairness or strategy that confused 5-year-olds just wanting to play. He started spending recess alone, drawing or reading. The teacher tried intervening, but Ethan seemed content with solitude until he met Oliver, a new kid who transferred in mid-year. Oliver was 6, held back a year due to health issues, had a heart condition that made him fragile and cautious. The other kids avoided him, too scared of hurting him or dealing with his medical restrictions. But Ethan gravitated to him immediately. I picked Ethan up from school one day and found them sitting together under a tree. Not playing, just talking. When I asked Ethan about his new friend, his eyes lit up. Oliver understands things, he said. He knows what it's like to be different. I met Oliver's father, Vincent, during a school event. He was a single dad. Oliver's mother had died during childbirth. He'd raised Oliver alone while dealing with his son's ongoing medical needs. We connected immediately, both of us raising unusual children, both of us navigating challenges that other parents couldn't understand. Vincent and I started having coffee while the kids played. He told me about Oliver's brush with death at age 3, how his heart had stopped during surgery and doctors had brought him back, how Oliver had been different after that, calmer, wiser, said things that suggested he'd seen something while he was gone. I told him about Ethan, not everything, but enough, about the impossible knowledge, the personality changes, the feeling that my son carried something extra inside him. Vincent didn't judge, just nodded like he understood completely. Our families started spending time together. The kids were inseparable, and Vincent and I became friends in a way I hadn't had friends since college. He understood the isolation of raising a child who didn't fit normal categories. We'd watch our sons playing elaborate games that seemed to have rules only they understood, creating worlds more complex than kindergartners should imagine. One evening, Vincent asked me directly, "Do you think they remember something? From before?" I knew what he meant. Before birth, before this life. Whatever came before consciousness entered small bodies. Yeah, I admitted. I think they do. We sat in silence, watching our sons, both of them carrying mysteries we'd never solve. Both of them touched by something beyond normal childhood development. Oliver's father told me something that kept me up that night. When Oliver's heart had stopped during surgery, he'd been clinically dead for 4 minutes, long enough for brain damage. But when he came back, he was fine, better than fine. The doctors couldn't explain it. Vincent said Oliver had told him he'd seen people while he was gone, dead relatives, strangers who felt like family, and an old man who'd told him to go back, that his friend was waiting for him. He described the old man, Vincent said quietly. I looked him up later in family photos. It was my grandfather, who died 30 years before Oliver was born. The similarities between our sons' experiences were too significant to ignore, both touched by consciousness from previous lives, both carrying knowledge they shouldn't have. I asked Professor Reeves about it. She said cases like Ethan and Oliver sometimes found each other, Like consciousness recognized consciousness. Souls that had crossed the boundary between life and death were drawn together. She'd documented it before. Support groups for near-death survivors often became places where unusual children congregated, drawn together by shared experiences with the other side. Rachel was less comfortable with Oliver than I was. She saw him as a reminder of what happened to Ethan, another child touched by death. She worried they'd reinforce each other's strangeness instead of helping each other be normal. But I saw something different. I saw two boys who understood each other in ways nobody else could, who didn't have to pretend or hide, who could just be themselves, whatever that meant. Ethan started sleeping better with Oliver as a friend. The nightmares about the war decreased. The episodes of slipping into my grandfather's consciousness became rarer. Like having someone who understood helped ground him in his own identity. Professor Reeves said this made sense. Connection was grounding. Identity became stronger in relationship. But then something happened that shattered our fragile peace. Ethan came home from school with a note from the counselor. They'd done a class exercise where kids drew their families. Ethan's drawing had concerned her. He'd drawn our normal family. But behind us, in gray pencil, were other figures. Shadowy people the counselor couldn't identify. When she'd asked Ethan about them, he'd said they were the family he remembered from before. The counselor wanted to meet with us, discuss what this meant, whether Ethan was having dissociative episodes. We met with her the next day. Ms. Kimberly Lawson, a young counselor who seemed genuinely concerned but out of her depth. She showed us Ethan's drawing. Behind our family, he'd drawn 5 shadowy figures, different heights, different builds. When I looked closer, I recognized them. My grandfather's brothers, all dead before I was born. All people Ethan had never seen photos of. Ms. Lawson asked if Ethan had experienced trauma we hadn't disclosed, said these shadowy figures suggested unprocessed grief or exposure to death that he was struggling to integrate. Rachel started crying. I told Ms. Lawson we'd handle it privately. Pulled Ethan from school early. We needed answers about what was happening to him. Why my grandfather's presence hadn't faded like we'd hoped. Why Ethan was getting worse instead of better. Dr. Liu agreed to see us emergency. He examined Ethan for 2 hours, ran more tests, asked detailed questions about the drawings, the memories, the episodes. His conclusion was devastating. Ethan wasn't healing from the possession. He was fragmenting. The merger between his consciousness and my grandfather's wasn't complete. Pieces of both were still separate, fighting for dominance, creating confusion and distress. He recommended immediate intervention, intensive therapy, possibly medication, definitely pulling Ethan from school until they could stabilize his condition. Rachel broke down completely. This was her worst fear realized. Our son wasn't okay, wasn't recovering, was actively getting worse. I felt numb, like I was watching this happen to someone else's family. Dr. Liu prescribed anti-anxiety medication for Ethan, said it might help reduce the episodes, give his consciousness time to settle. But he was honest. He didn't know if this would work. Had no roadmap for treating a child suffering from incomplete soul merger. That night, I sat with Ethan before bed, asked him directly what was happening, what he felt, what he remembered. He looked at me with those old eyes and said something that broke my heart. I don't know who I am anymore, Daddy. Sometimes I'm me, sometimes I'm someone else, and I can't tell the difference. I held him while he cried, 4 years old and having an identity crisis that would challenge a philosopher. My son, my father, both of them trapped in one small body that couldn't contain them both. I called Professor Reeves at midnight, told her everything Dr. Liu had said, asked if she knew anyone who'd dealt with this, anyone who'd successfully helped a child resolve incomplete consciousness merger. She was quiet for a long time. There's someone, she finally said. Dr. Ruth Hammond. She's done work with trauma and consciousness that's considered fringe even by my standards, but she's had success with cases like Ethan's. She gave me Dr. Hammond's number, said she was in Arizona, would require us to travel, but if anyone could help Ethan, it was her. Rachel didn't want to go, said we'd tried enough experimental treatments, that we needed to accept Ethan was broken and focus on managing his condition, not fixing it. I told her I wasn't giving up. If there was a chance Dr. Hammond could help, we had to try. We fought again, worse than before. She accused me of making this about my grandfather instead of our son. Said I was so desperate to keep that connection alive that I couldn't see how much it was hurting Ethan. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't watch my son suffer without trying everything. I took Ethan to Arizona alone. Rachel stayed home. Said she couldn't watch me put him through more experimental treatments. The flight was hard. Ethan had a panic attack mid-flight. Started crying that he didn't know where he was, that this wasn't his time, that planes didn't exist in 1952. I held him in the tiny airplane bathroom while he hyperventilated, whispered that he was Ethan, my son. Born in 2019, not William Crawford, not from 1952. He calmed down eventually, but the incident shook me. Ethan was getting lost between identities. Dr. Hammond's office was in a small building outside Phoenix. Nothing like the sterile medical facilities we'd visited. This place felt more like a home. Warm, comfortable, safe. Dr. Hammond was in her 70s, with kind eyes and a presence that immediately put Ethan at ease. She sat with him for an hour before even acknowledging I was in the room. Just talked to him, asked about his favorite things, his friends, his dreams, building trust before diving into trauma. When she finally turned to me, her expression was serious. This child is carrying more than one lifetime of experiences, and they're not integrated properly. It's like having two incomplete puzzles mixed together. He can't separate which pieces belong to which picture. She explained that consciousness wasn't as simple as people thought. It wasn't a single unified thing. It was layers, experiences, memories, all woven together into a sense of self. When two consciousnesses merged, those layers had to integrate, become one coherent narrative. For Ethan, that hadn't happened. Dr. Hammond said she could help, but it would take time, weeks, maybe months, and it would require Ethan to confront memories and experiences that would be difficult, traumatic even, reliving my grandfather's war experiences, processing his grief and regrets. A 4-year-old shouldn't have to carry that weight, but he already was. The question was whether we'd help him organize it or let him drown in it. I called Rachel, told her what Dr. Hammond said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked what I thought we should do. I think we have to try, I said. He's suffering. If she can help him make sense of what's happening, we have to try. Rachel flew out 2 days later. Couldn't stay away from Ethan even though she was angry with me. Dr. Hammond's treatment was unlike anything I'd expected. No medication, no traditional therapy. She used something she called consciousness mapping. Worked with Ethan to identify which memories and experiences belonged to him versus which belonged to my grandfather. Helped him see the boundaries, understand where Ethan ended and William Crawford began. It was slow work, painful. Ethan would have breakthroughs followed by setbacks, days where he seemed clear and grounded, days where he couldn't remember his own name. Rachel and I stayed in a small rental house near Dr. Hammond's office, took Ethan to daily sessions, tried to maintain some normalcy in an impossible situation. Vincent called to check on us, said Oliver missed Ethan terribly, that he'd been drawing pictures for him. Rachel put him on speaker so Ethan could hear. Oliver's small voice came through. Come home soon. I'm saving my best toys for when you get back. Ethan smiled. First genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. I'm working on remembering who I am, he told Oliver. It's hard, but I think I'm getting better. You're my best friend, Oliver said. That's who you are. The simplicity of that statement hit me hard. To Oliver, Ethan's identity wasn't complicated. He was just his friend, his best friend. Nothing else mattered. After 6 weeks with Dr. Hammond, Ethan started showing real improvement. The episodes decreased. His sense of self stabilized. He could talk about my grandfather's memories without getting lost in them, could acknowledge they existed without being consumed by them. Dr. Hammond explained that they'd created what she called conscious compartments, spaces in Ethan's mind where my grandfather's experiences lived separately from his own. He could access them if needed, learn from them, but they wouldn't overwhelm his core identity anymore. He'll always carry your grandfather inside him, she said, but he's learned to be the container, not the contents. We flew home in late December. Ethan fell asleep on my shoulder during the flight, just a tired kid after a long trip, not a 4-year-old having an existential crisis. Rachel held my hand for the first time in months. We'd survived this, not intact, not unchanged, but together. Ethan went back to school after New Year's. His teacher said he seemed calmer, more focused, still advanced beyond his years, but better able to relate to his classmates. Oliver was waiting for him on the playground that first day back. I watched them run to each other and hug like long-lost friends. Vincent walked over to stand beside me. They're going to be okay, he said. Both of them. I wanted to believe him. We got back into routine, work, school, normal family life. Ethan still had moments, times when my grandfather's presence was stronger, but he could manage them now. Could say, I'm feeling grandpa today, and we'd understand. Would give him space to be whoever he needed to be. Rachel and I continued marriage counseling. Dr. Odom said we'd been through something most couples couldn't survive. The fact that we were still together was significant, but we had work to do. Rebuilding trust, rebuilding intimacy, learning to support each other through ongoing uncertainty, because Ethan wasn't fixed, would never be normal. We just had better tools to help him navigate his complicated reality. My mother visited monthly, spent time with Ethan. Sometimes he'd slip into my grandfather's voice and mannerisms with her. She'd smile, tears in her eyes, and talk to him like he was her father. Those visits seemed to help both of them. Her, getting moments with the father she'd lost. Ethan, understanding that his condition wasn't entirely a burden, that it brought comfort to people who needed it. Professor Reeves published a paper on consciousness transference, changed names and details but documented Ethan's case. It was dismissed by mainstream science, relegated to fringe journals, but people who needed it found it. Other families dealing with impossible situations reached out. We connected them with Dr. Hammond, helped where we could. Ethan turned 6. His birthday party was simple, just family and Oliver, but it felt momentous. We'd made it through a year that should have destroyed us. Ethan blew out his candles and made a wish. Later, I asked what he'd wished for. That Grandpa knows I'm okay, he said, that he doesn't worry about me anymore. I hugged him tight. My son, my father, both of them in one body, both of them loved beyond measure. That night I stood in his doorway watching him sleep. He looked peaceful, just a kid dreaming kid dreams. But I knew the truth. Inside that small body lived experiences spanning decades, wisdom earned through suffering, love that had transcended death itself. I'll see you soon, kiddo. My grandfather had kept his promise, found a way to stay, to watch me raise my son, to be part of Ethan in ways we'd never fully understand. And somehow, impossibly, that gift was becoming bearable. Rachel came to stand beside me, took my hand. He's going to be okay, she whispered. We all are. I wanted to believe her. The next morning, Ethan came downstairs for breakfast, poured himself cereal, added milk, completely normal, until he looked up at me with that expression, that knowing, ancient expression. I love you, kiddo, he said in my grandfather's voice. Then he blinked and was just Ethan again, eating cereal, watching cartoons, being 6. I sat down beside him, pulled him into a sideways hug. He leaned into me, comfortable and safe. Love you too, Dad, he said in his own voice. And in that moment, I understood. This was our life now. Ethan, my grandfather, all of us intertwined, learning to exist in this impossible reality where love had proven stronger than death, where consciousness had found a way to persist, where my son carried forward not just genes but lived experience, memories, wisdom, the weight of another life. It wasn't normal, wasn't what I'd wanted for my son, but it was ours, and we'd learned to live with it, to find moments of peace within the strangeness, to appreciate the gift even as we acknowledged the burden. Ethan finished his cereal and went to get dressed for school. I heard him humming as he climbed the stairs, an old song, big band era, my grandfather's favorite. Rachel looked at me. We both knew what that meant. He's still there, she said quietly. Part of him always will be, I agreed. And somehow, finally, that was okay. If you're still here, you're a true fan. Show some support with a like and subscribe to catch the next one.